from the New York Post from 1 year ago. Dr. Phil tells The View host that children crossing the border are being sent into prostitution and sweatshops. And this isn't the only story. He spoke with the head of the CBP union on camera, who stated, quote, "I talked to the head of all the border guards down there, the head of the union. I asked him straight up, kids are coming over the border with numbers written on them, phone numbers and addresses. Do we check those out?" He said, "Well, we call them," quote, "is it possible that we're sending them into known prostitution rings or sweatshops?" He said, "It's not possible. It is absolute. We are using American tax dollars to ship children into known prostitution and sweatshops." And when asked over and over again, like when I bring this up, the issue is clear. CBP agents were instructed at the highest level not to interfere in this process. And if a child came across that they knew was going into sex slavery, just transport them to the vehicles and send them where they're supposed to go.
Savannah Hernandez did a lot of reporting on this at the border and uncovered the exact same thing. Wow. And it was very clear. And she had like undercover CBP agents talking to her. She had to disguise their voices because they were terrified. There's like a rape tree, basically, where there's paraphernalia left from children on this tree.
So the issue we have now is, yes, Joe Biden told them, you can come across the border and we will ignore the law and do whatever you want. And while the Democrats will say the barber was just an asylum seeker. Sure. My understanding, I could be wrong, is this guy was illegally entered the country coming from Venezuela. It's typically implied, or I believe it's not absolute law, but you're supposed to apply for asylum in the first country of safe harbor or whatever.
Haven, yeah.
Safe haven. And they all skip over all of these countries.
Trump reinstituted that and said that's what has to happen. You have to apply for asylum in the first safe country you get to.
So when we're talking about Joe Biden letting these people in, we are speaking broadly of the sex traffickers, the drug traffickers, the gangs, the cartels, the criminals, and some, I think, who are fine people. The Democrats ignore all of the crime and say they're legal asylees.
Well, because they changed, like you were saying, they changed the definition of legal. So they add all of these sort of like sub-legal categories: refugee, asylum seeker, temporary protected status, unaccompanied minor, without having any way to check any of the ages or where they're from or how they got there or anything. And so now you have Trump trying to revoke a lot of this stuff. Like revoke the temporary protected status, which is what, like 500,000 people from Cuba, Nicaragua, Venezuela, and Haiti, and say like, you're done. And the interesting thing about a lot of the people who come in on the temporary protected status program and the refugee program is you don't have to be coming from the nation that has, refugee capable status. You can be living perfectly comfortably somewhere else. Like you could be a Haitian who moved to Bolivia or whatever, and you're coming now from Bolivia with Haitian refugee status, even though you're basically just giving up whatever life you had constructed in Bolivia. Kind of like when the UN says anyone of Palestinian descent is a refugee, even if they've been, in Jordan for like 25, 30, 50 years.
Or 3 generations.
Or back to 48, whatever.
I have repeatedly called for all of these CBP agents to be imprisoned since this story came out. And if they're, Dan Bongino stepped down from one of the biggest live shows, biggest podcasts in the world to serve at the FBI. And people always say, Tim, get into politics. I never would do it. There's one thing I would do. If Donald Trump said, Tim, we want you to work in the DOJ with Dan and Cash, and your only job is to find law enforcement officers who facilitated crimes against children or otherwise broke their oath and bring charges, investigate, and I'd done, Mr. President. Because there's a lot that I think, I am kind of half kidding. I'm just saying that's how passionate I am about this stuff. But I think if as absurd a moment ever came up, if I was asked to go after the law enforcement officers who are facilitating children into sex trafficking because Biden told them to, I would do that in a heartbeat.
How do they live with themselves, How do you live with yourself?
That's an interesting question to ask, because you were talking about the lawyer who was talking about how he thinks that borders shouldn't exist at all. Anyways, What is it about modern day, whether it's Democrats or leftist politics, that makes it so easy to ignore stories like this? Is it some form of...
Sorry, it's actually worse than ignore. And if I can give the example of two cultural examples. One is the Sound of Freedom film. This film was made about Tim Ballard, about sexual exploitation and trafficking of children. They didn't just ignore that film. Yes, they ignored it. They demonized it. Yeah. They slandered him. They went after him. That film, which I saw in a Los Angeles theater, in a normal theater, erupted in applause at the end. Everyone was in tears. It moved everyone. The people loved it. It did crazy good numbers. The people cared about it. How did Hollywood treat it? They wrote these slanderous articles. They called it all conspiratorial. Now, the same thing happened in the music industry when Oliver Anthony, the musician behind the song Rich Men North of Richmond, he has a line in there, I wish politicians would care about minors instead of minors on some island somewhere. Same thing happened again. They went after him for that line. They said it's conspiratorial, it's playing into these right-wing influencer QAnon nonsense. That's their attack. How is it that this has become a political this is partisan? How is that this is above politics?
There was for a long time this conspiracy that powerful individuals were all pedophiles and engaged in sex trafficking, and the media said you're nuts. And then the Epstein story broke, and everyone went, whoa.
Wait a second.
And today the big story was Virginia Giuffre posted that she has 4 days to live because she's in renal failure after a serious accident.
She got hit by a bus.
Very sad.
Hit by a bus. I have a question. Do you have any kids, Winston?
No.
You do not have any, but Libby does.
I have one son.
So I would ask you, Libby, on a scale of Jason Statham to Liam Neeson, how crazy would you go if someone kidnapped your child?
Oh, I would lose it fully.
Liam Neeson? Full Liam Neeson?
Yeah, Wait,
Liam Neeson is losing it fully, not Jason Statham?
I don't even know what you're talking about.
Jason's...
I don't even, I've never seen those films because I can't handle viscerally this concept of someone taking my child. I literally just can't handle it.
Jason Statham is the general. He has the
total
movies.
Destruction, arson, total insanity.
Jason Statham has the general movies where he goes after people generally.
Yeah, he beat Rachel Zegler at the box office this weekend.
Oh my God.
That movie, it looks pretty good, actually.
But Liam Neeson had the specific movies where his kid got taken. You know what I mean? We're joking about, but actually this is a really good question that you ask, and it's really relevant to my country, Britain. You'll have heard of the British Pakistani rape gangs, where over the course of decades, tens of thousands of young British girls, predominantly white girls, were targeted by British Pakistani Muslim gangs because they were kafir. And what does that mean?
It just
not
means they
Muslim.
didn't think highly of them. They thought they were trash.
They thought they were trash.
And didn't the cops also think they were trash?
The cops were complicit.
Yeah.
And these kids, there were cases where the kids, when they reported on it happening to them, the kids themselves were arrested. In one case because the young girl
they
was
were like, "Oh, you're
drunk and disorderly."
Now they got her drunk.
But can I say why this is relevant to what Tim's question is? Because after decades of that, after decades of the police doing fuck all about it, and last summer we had this horrible attack taken out by Axel Rudakabana on 3 young girls in Southport in the north of England, and a lot of British men were like, we've had enough. Tommy Robinson, in an interview with Jordan Peterson, said when he was a teenager, his teenage cousin was abused by one of these rape gangs. And actually, this is what you're seeing in Britain is, for how many decades can you go after our daughters and not do anything before we respond?
You need to go like full Invincible. I don't know if you guys watch that show, but full Invincible on these guys.
I was going to say I fear a full V for Vendetta, where the scene is the little girl wearing the mask is skipping down the street and the finger man shoots her, and then all the people from the town show up with crowbars and baseball bats, and then it's implied what happens next.
Well, you mentioned earlier, like, is there going to be an event that leads to that? I feel like information is so decentralized now, and we're so disconnected as a society that there isn't one event like that could do that the way it did in that movie.
The reason why I asked that question is because the opening scene in Sound of Freedom, the opening, not scene, but I guess scene is a man's children are told they could be movie stars, they could be models, and to bring them up so they could get a test screening. And the father brings them and they say, you have to wait outside. We'll come back in a little bit. And when he comes back, they're gone. And his children have been taken. And that, the acting was superb, but man, that nightmare scenario.
When I was a teenager, I was approached in Harvard Square by someone who was like, oh, you should be a model with us, blah, blah, blah. And they gave me their card. And I went home and I was like, Dad. And he was like, no. What's that card? Where are these people? And I was
That's
like,
scary,
"But
man.
Dad, that would be fun. I could make money." And he was like, "No, absolutely never."
You know, a lot of people told me that my opinion would change when I had a kid on a lot of things. And I'm like, I find it largely is the same. But the only thing that's changed is if it was done to me personally, it couldn't before when I didn't have a kid, and now it could. And Liam Neeson on Super Soldier Serum, we'll call it that. It would be a tremendous movie. People would love it. Superheroes and all. Just do a movie where you combine Captain America and Liam Neeson and his daughter gets taken again.
Have you been following what's going on with the show Adolescence on Netflix and how it's talking about knife crime and incel culture and toxic masculinity amongst kids who are only 13 years old?
I have not seen the show itself, but this is all over the papers.
I haven't seen the show either.
It's a lot of right wingers are upset because the show depicts it as a young white kid who's doing it, and right wingers are upset because they would say the violence is actually from other ethnic groups. But
the director
I'm not sure I agree
said
with that.
the director said that he took inspiration from the violence that horrified him about specific knife crime incidents, and then people made that a racial issue. The director says it's not that, but people make their.
So the thing that's curious to me about that, and this is part of the British liberal narrative at the moment, is that the young boys and men are getting radicalized online by Andrew Tate types and, the concept of incel. But if you look at the data, it seems to me that the online, I'm not saying that the online social media isn't affecting boys, but it seems that it's affecting girls a lot worse. And examples of this would be the increase in suicide around young girls. The JD Vance has been talking a lot about censorship and worried about how British companies are going to be censoring Americans. And that goes back to this online safety bill, which was inspired by the suicide of a young girl called Molly, I think Molly Brand. And she committed suicide and it led to it. But so the suicide rates among young girls, and not only that, politically, women are becoming far more progressive and they're going more extreme. And if you look at the data of how the elections through 2024, it seemed that women were turning harder to the left, but the media and the liberal media painted it as men becoming more aggressive,
so what they're
more politically extreme.
What they're doing right now is they just made Adolescence available to all high schools throughout all of the UK per the Prime Minister, because they want to make sure that as many people can see it as possible, because they're painting the boys in the country as the problem. And the other thing that was interesting is that not just that, but now they're teaching anti-misogyny classes to boys.
That'll work.
Yeah.
This is the news from yesterday, is that a toddler aged between 2 and 4 was suspended from school for being transphobic.
Well, what was interesting about that was it was actually the period of, I think, the school year 2022 to 2023 was 178 children across grades were suspended for transphobia, homophobia.
Thanks for checking out this clip from Timcast IRL. Make sure to watch the show live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. Subscribe to this channel, and we will see you all there.